right, now that I've got you in the mood, thank you, blessed Mega Drive, for your stupid gritty synth productions. Ah, so much fun. All right, so good morning, evening, afternoon, night, depending on where you are on the globe. Yes, it's a sphere. Shocker, I know. Actually, it's slightly oblate. I think it's not quite perfectly spherical. Doesn't matter. Irrelevant. Um, good morning, and welcome back to Storytime Saturdays. I am your narrator at all costs, Fragath. And today we're going to continue our read through of Snow Crash. We're about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through. I got a good chunk lined up right now. We might go a bit further than that chunk. Actually, yeah, we could do that. That's only another page. That's a short chapter. We'll see. I have a. It's gonna still be like another couple sessions worth to get this book done, but once we do, it'll be really banged out. I'm pretty excited. Hmm. Hey, it could be night. I don't know. It's a globe. For you, it probably is. Um, so last time, Hiro protagonist just escaped from a bunch of incorrigible racist migrants. Not immigrants, migrants. They're migrating from parts of the United States northward because they can. And they're bad people. And so Hiro, in self-defense, cuts off one of their heads and keeps on going because he's a badass. Hiro protagonist, ladies and gentlemen. He does what he's got to do. He does what he's got to do to survive in the harsh near future world of Snow Crash. Let's see. YT's mom is being interrogated by the feds to see how much she knows about certain subjects, namely Snow Crash, which her daughter has informed her about now. So the feds want to know just how much YT knows, and how much YT's mom knows about what YT knows. What it is, whatever. It's complicated. It's complicated, but no big deal. I'm trying to remember if anything else of import happened. Mostly it was those are the biggies. Um, Coming up, we've got YT making a foray into Fedland, where all the feds are, and Hiro is going to be making his way towards the Raft, where which is the epicenter, if you will, of this snow crash epidemic. And hopefully find out just what the hell is going on, but beware of any Aleuts surfing on kayaks in the ocean. That's foreshadowing. Because, oh, you bet our boy Raven is coming back. You bet. Raven is bonkers. He doesn't give a damn. Nuclear equipped sidecar on his friggin' motorcycle? Yeah, so? Poor impulse control? You bet your sweet bippy. This man is a madman. And that's just how we like it. Okay. I'm gonna get another slug of tea here. And we will just hop right on in then. Oh, of course. Why would it be easy? Why does it not know where to record these things to? That's what gets me. This happens like every other time, and I don't know why. For some reason, it just is not thrilled with my NAS situation. Let me try making a lot of clicky click noises. Nope, that's the wrong one. There we go. Yep, okay. And Fuck it, we'll do it the hard way. I would prefer to have these recorded, but I don't care. I'll edit and splice them later or something if I ever have the energy and time, which is unlikely. Chapter 41. YT has been to some unusual places in her career. She has the vistas of some 3 dozen countries laminated onto her chest. And on top of the real countries, she has picked up and or delivered to such charming little vacation spots as the Terminal Island Sacrifice Zone and the encampment in Griffith Park. But the weirdest job of all is this new one. Someone wants her to deliver some stuff to the United States of America. Says so right there on the job order. It's not much of a delivery, just a legal-size envelope.
You sure you don't want to just mail this?
She asks the guy when she picks it up. It's one of these creepy office parks out in the burbs. Like a burbclave for worthless businesses that have offices and phones and stuff but don't actually seem to do anything. It's a sarcastic question, of course. The mail doesn't work except in Fedland. All the mailboxes have been unbolted and used to decorate the apartments of nostalgia freaks. But it's also kind of a joke, because the destination is, in fact, a building in the middle of Fedland. So the joke is, if you want to deal with the feds, why not use their fucked up mail system? Aren't you afraid that by dealing with anything as incredibly cool as a courier, you will be tainted in their eyes? Well, the mail doesn't come out here, does it? The guy says. No point in describing the office. No point in even allowing the office to even register on her eyeballs and take up valuable memory space in her brain. Fluorescent lights and partitions with carpet glued to them. I prefer my carpet on the floor, thank you. A color scheme. Ergonomic shit. Chicks with lipstick. Xerox smell. Everything's pretty new, she figures. The legal envelope is resting on the guy's desk. Not much point in describing him either. Describing him either. Traces of a southern or Texan accent. The bottom edge of the envelope is parallel to the edge of the desk, 1/4 inch away from it, perfectly centered between the left and right sides. Like he had a doctor come in here and put it on the desk with tweezers. It is addressed to Room 968A, Mail Stop MS 1569835, Building LA6, United States of America.
You want a return address on this?
She says. That's not necessary.
If I can't deliver it, there's no way I can get it back to you because all these places look the same to me.
It's not important, he says. When do you think you'll get it there?
2 hours max.
Why so long?
Customs, man. The feds haven't modernized their system like everyone else.
Which is why most couriers will do anything to avoid delivering to Fedland. But it's a slow day today. YT hasn't been called in to do any secret missions for the Mafia yet, and maybe she can catch Mom on her lunch break. And your name is? Oh, wait.
And your name is?
We don't give out our names.
I need to know who's delivering this.
Oh, I borked it twice. That's really charming. And your name is?
We don't give out our names.
I need to know who's delivering this.
Why? You said it wasn't important.
The guy gets really flustered. Okay, he says. Forget it. Just deliver it, please. Okay, be that way, she mentally says. She mentally says a number of other things, too. The man is an obvious pervert. It's so plain, so open. And your name is? Give me a break, man. Names are unimportant. Everyone knows couriers are interchangeable parts. It's just that some happen to be a lot faster and better. So she skates out of the office. It's all very anonymous. No corporate logos anywhere. So, as she's waiting for the elevator, she calls Radix, tries to find out who initiated this call. The answer comes back a few minutes later as she's riding out of the office park, pooned onto a nice Mercedes. Rife Advanced Research Enterprises. RARE. Rare. One of these high-tech outfits. Probably trying to get a government contract. Probably trying to sell sphygmometers to the feds or something like that. Oh well, she just delivers them. She gets the impression that this Mercedes is sandbagging, driving real slow so she'll poon something else. So she poons something else, an outgoing delivery truck. Judging from the way it's riding high on its springs, it must be empty, so it'll probably move along pretty fast. 10 seconds later, predictably, the Mercedes blasts by in the left lane, so she poons that and rides it nice and hard for a couple of miles. Getting into Fedland is a drag. Most Fedsters drive tiny plastic and aluminum cars that are hard to poon. But eventually she nails one, a little jelly bean with glued on windows and a 3-cylinder engine, and that takes her up to the United States border. The smaller this country gets, the more paranoid they become. Nowadays, the customs people are just impossible. She has to sign a 10-page document, and they actually make her read it. They say it should take at least half an hour for her to just read the thing.
But I read it 2 weeks ago.
It must have changed, the guard says, so you have to read it again. Basically, it just certifies that YT is not a terrorist, communist, whatever that is, homosexual, national, symbol desecrator, pornography merchant, welfare parasite, racially insensitive, carrier of any infectious disease, or advocate of any ideology tending to impugn traditional family values. Most of it is just definitions of all the words used on the first page. So, YT sits in the little room for half an hour, doing housekeeping work, going over her stuff, changing batteries in all her little devices, cleaning her nails, having her skateboard run its self-maintenance procedures. Then she signs the fucking document and hands it over to the guy. And then, she's in Fedland. It's not hard finding the place. Typical Fed building, a million steps, like it's built on top of a mountain of steps. Columns. A lot more guys in this one than usual. Chunky guys with slippery hair. Must be some kind of cop building. The guard at the front door is a cop all the way. Wants to give her a big hassle about carrying her skateboard into the place. Like they've got a safe place out front to keep skateboards. The cop guy is completely hard to deal with. But that's okay. So is YT.
Here's the envelope, she says. You can take it up to the ninth floor yourself on your coffee break. Too bad you have to take the stairs.
Look, he says, totally exasperated. This is Ebgok. This is like the headquarters. Ebgok Central. You got that? Everything that happens within a mile is being videotaped. People don't spit on the pavement within sight of this building. They don't even say bad words. Nobody's going to steal your skateboard.
That's even worse. They'll steal it. Then they'll say they didn't steal it. They confiscated it. I know you feds, you're always confiscating shit.
The guy sighs. Then his eyes go out of focus and he shuts up for a minute. YT can tell he's getting a message over the little earphone that's plugged into his ear, the mark of the true Fed. Go on in, he says, but you gotta sign.
Naturally,
YT says. The cop hands her the sign-in sheet, which is actually a notebook computer with an electronic pen. She writes YT on the screen. It's converted to a digital bitmap, automatically time-stamped, and sent off to the big computer at Fed Central. She knows she's not going to make it through the metal detector without stripping naked, so she just vaults the cop's table. What's he gonna do, shoot her? And heads on into the building, skateboard under her arm. Hey, he says weakly.
what, you got lots of EBGOC agents in here being mugged and raped by female couriers?
She says, stomping the elevator button ferociously. Elevator takes forever. She loses her patience and just climbs the stairs like all the other feds. The guy is right. It's definitely Cop Central here on the ninth floor. Every creepy guy in sunglasses and slippery hair you've ever seen. They're all here, all with little flesh-tone helices of wire trailing down from their ears. There's even some female feds. They look even scarier than the guys. The things that a woman can do to her hair to make herself look professional. Jesus! Why not just wear a motorcycle helmet? At least then you can take it off. Except none of the feds, male or female, is wearing sunglasses. They look naked without them. Might as well be walking around with no pants on. Seeing these feds without their mirror specs is like blundering into the boys' locker room. She finds room 968A easily enough. Most of the floor is just a big pool of desks. All the actual numbered rooms are around the edges, with frosted glass doors. Each of the creepy guys seems to have a desk of his own. Some of them loiter near their desks. The rest of them are doing a lot of hall jogging and impromptu conferencing at other creepy guys' desks. Their white shirts are painfully clean. Not as many shoulder holsters as she would expect. All the gun-carrying feds are probably out in what used to be Alabama or Chicago trying to confiscate back bits of United States territory from what is now a buy and fly or a toxic waste dump. She goes on into room 968A. It's an office. 4 Fed guys are in here, the same as the others, except most of them are a tad older, in their 40s and 50s.
Got a delivery for this room, YT says.
"You're YT?" says the head Fed, who's sitting behind the desk.
You're not supposed to know my name, YT says. How did you know my name?
"I recognized you," the head Fed says. "I know your mother." YT does not believe him, but these Feds have all kinds of ways of finding out stuff.
Do you have any relatives in Afghanistan?
She says. The guys all look back and forth at each other, like, did you understand the chick? But it's not a sentence that is intended to be understood. Actually, YT has all kinds of voice recognition where in her coverall and in her plank. When she says, "Do you have any relatives in Afghanistan?" that's like a code phrase. It tells all of her spook gear to get ready, shake itself down, check itself out, prick up its electronic ears.
You want this envelope or not?
She says. "I'll take it," the head Fed says, standing up and holding out one hand. YT walks into the middle of the room and hands him the envelope. But instead of taking it, he lunges out at the last minute and grabs her forearm. She sees an open handcuff in his other hand. He brings it out and snaps it down on her wrist so it tightens and locks shut over the cuff of her coverall. "I'm sorry to do this, YT, but I have to place you under arrest," he's saying.
What the fuck are you doing?
YT is saying. She's holding her free arm back away from the desk so he can't cuff her wrists together, but one of the other Feds grabs her by the free wrist, so now she's stretched out like a tightrope between the 2 big Feds.
You guys are dead,
She says. All the guys smile, like they enjoy a chick with some spunk.
You guys are dead,
She says a second time. This is the key phrase that all of her wear is waiting to hear. When she says it the second time, all the self-defense stuff comes on, which means that among other things, a few thousand volts of radio frequency electrical power suddenly flood through the outsides of her cuffs. The head Fed behind the desk blurts out a grunt from way down in his stomach. He flies back away from her, his entire right side jerking spastically, trips over his own chair, and sprawls back into the wall, smacking his head on the marble windowsill. The jerk who's yanking on her other arm stretches out like he's on an invisible rack, accidentally slapping one of the other guys in the face, giving that guy a nice dose of juice to the head. Both of them hit the floor like a sack of rabid cats. There's only one of these guys left, and he's reaching under his jacket for something. She takes one step toward him, swings her arm around, and at the end of the loose manacle strokes him in the neck. Just a caress, but it might as well be a two-handed blow from Satan's electric axe handle. That funky juice runs all up and down his spine, and suddenly he's sprawled across a couple of shitty old wooden chairs, and his pistol is rotating on the floor like a spinner in a children's game. She flexes her wrist in a particular way, and the Bundy stunner drops down her sleeve and into her hand. The manacle swinging from the other hand will have a similar effect on that side. She also pulls out the can of liquid knuckles, pops the lid, sets the spray nozzle on wide angle. One of the Fed creeps is nice enough to open the office door for her. He comes into the room with his gun already drawn, backed up by half a dozen other guys who flocked in here from the office pool, and she just lets them have it with the liquid knuckles. Whoosh! It's like bug spray. The sound of bodies hitting the floor is like a bass drum roll. She finds that her skateboard has no problem rolling across their prone bodies, and then she's out of the office pool. Out into the office pool. These guys are converging from all sides. There's an incredible number of them. She just keeps holding that button down, pointed straight ahead, digging at the floor with her foot, building up speed. The liquid knuckles acts like a chemical flying wedge. She's skating out of there on a carpet of bodies. Some of the feds are agile enough to dart in from behind and try to get her that way, but she's ready with the Bundy stunner, which turns their nervous systems into coils of hot barbed wire for a few minutes, but isn't supposed to have any other effects. She's made it about 3/4 of the way across the office when the liquid knuckles run out. But it still works for a second or two because people are afraid of it, keep diving out of the way even though there's nothing coming out. Then a couple of them figure it out, make the mistake of trying to grab her by the wrists. She gets one of them with the Bundy stunner and the other with the electric manacle. Then boom through the door and she's out into the stairwell, leaving 4 dozen casualties in her wake. Serves them right. They didn't even try to arrest her in a gentlemanly way. To a man on foot, stairs are a hindrance. But to the smart wheels, they just look like 45-degree angle. They look just like. Ah, geez Louise, my eyes. But to the smart wheels, they just look like a 45-degree angle ramp. It's a little choppy, especially when she's down to about the second floor and is going way too fast, but it's definitely doable. A lucky thing. One of the first floor cops is just opening the stairwell door, no doubt alerted by the symphony of alarm bells and buzzers that has begun to merge into a solid wall of hysterical sound. She blows by the guy. He puts out one arm in an attempt to stop her, sort of belts her across the waist in the process, throwing her balance off. But this is a very forgiving skateboard. It's smart enough to slow down for her a little bit when her center of mass gets into the wrong place. Pretty soon, it's back under her. She's banking radically through the elevator lobby, aiming dead center for the arch of the metal detector, through which the bright outdoor light of freedom is shining. Her old buddy the cop is up on his feet, and he reacts fast enough to spread eagle himself across the metal detector. YT acts like she's heading right for him, then kicks the board sideways at the last minute, punches one of the toe switches, coils her legs underneath her, and jumps into the air. She flies right over his little table while the plank is rolling underneath it, and a second later she lands on it, wobbles once, gets her balance back. She's in the lobby, headed for the doors. It's an old building. Most of the doors are metal, but there's a couple of revolving doors too, just big sheets of glass. Early thrashers used to inadvertently skate into walls of glass from time to time, which was a problem. It turned into a bigger problem when the whole courier thing got started and thrashers started spending a lot more time trying to go fast through office type environments where glass walls are considered quite the concept. Which is why on an average which is why on an expensive skateboard, like this one definitely is, you can get, as an extra added safety feature, the Radix Narrow Cone Tuned Shockwave Projector. It works on real short notice, which is good, but you can only use it once. It draws its power from an explosive charge. And then you have to take your plank into the shop to have it replaced. It's an emergency thing. Strictly a panic button. But that's cool. YT makes sure she's aimed directly at the glass revolving doors, then hits the appropriate toe switch. It's, my God, like you stretched a tarp across a stadium to turn it into a giant tom-tom and then crashed a 747 into it. She can feel her internal organs move several inches. Her heart trades places with her liver. The bottoms of her feet feel numb and tingly. And she's not even standing in the path of the shock wave. The safety glass in the revolving doors doesn't just crack and fall to the floor like she imagined it would. It is blown out of its moorings. It gushes out of the building and down the front steps. She follows an instant later. The ridiculous cascade of white marble steps on the front of the building just gives her more ramp time. By the time she reaches the sidewalk, she's easily got enough speed to coast all the way to Mexico.
As she's swinging out across the broad avenue, aiming her crosshairs at the customs post a quarter-mile away, which she is going to have to jump over, something tells her to look up. Because, after all, the building she just escaped from is towering above her, many stories full of Fed creeps, and all the alarms are going off. Most of the windows can't be opened. All they can do is look out. But there are people on the roof. Mostly the roof is a forest of antennas. If it's a forest, these guys are the creepy little gnomes who live in the trees. They are ready for action. They have their sunglasses on. They have weapons. They're all looking at her. But only one guy is taking aim, and the thing he's aiming at her is huge. The barrel is the size of a baseball bat. She can see the muzzle flash poke out of it, wreathed in a sudden donut of white smoke. It's not pointed right at her. It's aimed in front of her. The stun bunny lands on the street, dead ahead, bounces up in the air, and detonates at an altitude of 20 feet. The next quarter of a second. There's no bright flash to blind her, so she can actually see the shockwave spreading outward in a perfect sphere, hard and palpable as a ball of ice. Where the sphere contacts the street, it makes a circular wavefront, making pebbles bounce, flipping old McDonald's containers that have long been smashed flat, and coaxing fine, flour-like dust out of all the tiny crevices in the pavement, so that it sweeps across the road toward her like a microscopic blizzard. Above it, the shockwave hangs in the air, rushing toward her at the speed of sound, a lens of air that flattens and refracts everything on the other side. She's passing through it. Jeez Louise, there were absolutely zero breaks in that chapter. It just was nonstop. Badass cyberpunk punky stuff. Chapter 42. As Hiro crests the pass on his motorcycle at 5 in the morning, the town of Port Sherman, Oregon, is suddenly laid out before him. A flash of yellow low glow, wrapped into a vast U-shaped valley that was ground out of the rock, a long time ago, by a big tongue of ice in an epochal period of geological cunnilingus. There is just a light dusting of gold around the edges where it fades into the rainforest, thickening and intensifying as it approaches the harbor, a long, narrow fjord-like notch cut into the straight coastline of Oregon, a deep, cold trench of black water heading straight out to Japan. Hiro's back on the rim again. Feels good after that night ride through the sticks. Too many rednecks, too many Mounties. Even from 10 miles away and a mile above, it's not a pretty sight. Farther away from the central harbor district, Hiro can make out a few speckles of red, which is a little better than the yellow. He wishes he could see something in green or blue or purple, but there don't seem to be any neighborhoods done up in those gourmet colors. But then, this isn't exactly a gourmet town. Gourmet job, sorry. I'm gonna pop out of Steam real quick. Just so I don't keep getting pinged. And I'm going to do the same for Discord just in case. He wishes you could see something in green or blue or purple, but there don't seem to be any neighborhoods done up in those gourmet colors. But then, this isn't exactly a gourmet job. He rides half a mile off the road, sits down on a flat rock in an open space, ambush-proof, more or less, and goggles into the metaverse. Librarian? Yes, sir. Inanna. A figure from Sumerian mythology. Later cultures knew her as Ishtar or Esther. Good goddess or bad goddess? Good, a beloved goddess. Did she have any dealings with Enki or Asherah? Mostly with Enki. She and Enki were on good and bad terms at different times. Inanna was known as the queen of all the great May. I thought the May belonged to Enki. They did. but Inanna went to the Abzu, the watery fortress in the city of Eridu, where Enki stored up the May, and got Enki to give her all the May. This is how the May were released into civilization. Watery fortress, huh? Yes, sir. How did how did Enki feel about this? He gave them to her willingly, apparently because he was drunk and besotted with Inanna's physical charms. When he sobered up, he tried to chase her down and get them back, but she outsmarted him. Let's get semiotic, Hiro mumbles. The Raft is Elbab Rife's watery fortress. That's where he stores up all of his stuff. All of his May. Juanita went to Astoria, which was as close as you could get to the Raft a couple of days ago. I think she's trying to pull an Inanna. In another popular Sumerian myth, the librarian says, Inanna descends into the netherworld. Go on, Hiro says. She gathers together all of her May and enters the land of no return. Great. She passes through the netherworld and reaches the temple that is ruled over by Ereshkigal, goddess of death. She is traveling under false pretenses, which are easily penetrated by the all-seeing Ereshkigal. But Ereshkigal allows her to enter the temple. As Inanna enters, her robes and jewels and May are stripped from her, and she is brought, stark naked, before Ereshkigal and the 7 judges of the underworld. The judges fastened their eyes upon her, the eyes of death. At their word, the word which tortures the spirit, Inanna was turned into a corpse, a piece of rotting meat, and was hung from a hook on the wall. Kramer. Wonderful. Why the hell would she do something like that? As Diane Wolkstein puts it, Inanna gave up all she had accomplished in life until she was stripped naked, with nothing remaining but her will to be reborn. Because of her journey to the underworld, she took on the powers and mysteries of death and rebirth. Oh, so I guess there's more to the story? Inanna's messenger waits for 3 days, and when she fails to return from the netherworld, goes to the gods asking for their help. None of the gods is willing to help except for Enki. So our buddy Enki, the hacker god, has to bail her ass out of hell. Enki creates 2 people and sends them into the netherworld to rescue Inanna. Through their magic, Inanna is brought back to life. She returns from the netherworld, followed by a host of the dead. Juanita went to the Raft 3 days ago, Hiro says. It's time to get hacking. Earth is still where he left it, zoomed in to show a magnified view of the Raft. In the light of last night's chat with Chuck Wrightson, it's not hard to find the hunk of raft that was staked out by the Orthos when the Enterprise swung by Trock a few weeks back. There's a couple of big-assed Soviet freighters tied together, a swarm of small boats around them. Most of all the raft is dead brown and organic, but this section is all white fiberglass. Pleasure craft looted from the comfortable retirees of Trock. Thousands of them. Now the raft is off Port Sherman, so, Hiro figures, that's where the high priests of Asherah are hanging out. In a few days, they'll be in Eureka, then San Francisco, then L.A., a floating land link, tying the Orthos operations on the raft to the closest available point on the mainland. He turns away from the raft, skims across the ocean to Port Sherman to do a bit of reconnoitering there. Down along the waterfront, there's a nice crescent of cheap motels with yellow logos. Hiro rifles through them, looking for Russian names. That's easy. There's a Spectrum 2000 right in the middle of the waterfront. As the name implies, each one has a whole range of rooms, from human coin lockers in the lobby all the way up to luxury suites at the top. And a whole range of rooms has been rented out by a bunch of people with names ending in Off and Ovsky and other dead Slavic giveaways. The foot soldiers sleep in the lobby, laid out straight and narrow in coin lockers next to their AK-47s, and the priests and generals live in nice rooms higher up. Hiro pauses to wonder what a Pentecostal Russian Orthodox priest does with a magic fingers. The suite on the very top is being rented out by a gentleman by the name of Gurov, Mr. KGB himself. Too much of a wimp to hang out on the actual raft, apparently. How'd he get from the raft to Port Sherman? If it involves crossing a couple of 100 miles of North Pacific, it must be a decent-sized vessel. There are half a dozen marinas in Port Sherman. At the moment, most of them are clogged with small brown boats. It looks like a post-typhoon situation, where a few hundred square miles of ocean have been swept clean of sampans that have piled up against the nearest hard place. Except this is slightly more organized than that. The refuse are coming ashore already. If they're smart and aggressive, they probably know that they can walk to California from here. That explains why the piers are clogged with trashy little boats. But one of them still looks like a private marina. It's got a dozen or so clean white vessels, lined up neatly in their ships, no riffraff. In their slips, no riffraff. And the resolution of this image is good enough that Hiro can see the pier speckled with little donuts, probably rings of sandbags. That'd be the only way to keep your private moorage private when the raft was hovering offshore. The numbers, flags, and other identifying goodies are harder to make out. The satellite has a hard time picking that stuff out. Hiro checks to see whether CIC has a stringer in Port Sherman. They have to, because the raft is here, and CIC hopes to make a big business of selling the raft intelligence to all the anxious waterfronters between Skagway and Tierra del Fuego. Indeed, there are a few people hanging out in this town, uploading the latest Port Sherman intel, and one of them is just a punter with a video camera who goes around shooting pictures of everything. Hiro reviews this stuff in fast forward. A lot of it is shot from the Stringer's hotel window. Hours and hours of coverage of the stream of shitty little brown boats laboring their way up the harbor, tying up to the edge of the mini raft that's forming in the front of Port Sherman. In front of Port Sherman. But it's semi-organized, in that some apparently self-appointed water cops are buzzing around in a speedboat, aiming guns at people, shouting through a megaphone. And that explains why, no matter how tangled the mess in the harbor becomes, there's always a clear lane down the middle of the fjord, headed out to sea. And the terminus of that clear lane is the nice pier with the big boats. There are two big vessels there. One is a large fishing boat, flying a flag bearing the emblem of the Orthos, which is just a cross and a flame. It is obvious Trock loot. The name on the stern is Kodiak Queen, and the Orthos haven't bothered to change it yet. The other large boat is a small cruise vessel, made to carry rich people comfortably to nice places. It has a green flag and appears to be connected with Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong. Hiro does a little more poking around in the streets of Port Sherman and finds out that there is a pretty good-sized Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong franchulate here. In typical Hong Kong style, it is more of a spray of small buildings and rooms all over town. But it's a dense spray. Dense enough that Hong Kong has several full-time employees here, including a proconsul. Hiro pulls up the guy's picture so he'll recognize him. A crusty-looking Chinese-American gent in his 50s. So it's not an automated, unmanned franchulate like you normally see in the lower 48. Chapter 43. When she first woke up, she was still in her Radix coverall, mummified in gaffer's tape, lying on the floor of a shitty old Ford van blasting across the middle of nowhere. This did not put her into a very favorable mood. The stun bunny left her with a persistent nosebleed and an eternal throbbing headache, and every time the van hit a chuck hole, her head bounced on the corrugated steel floor. First, she was just pissed. Then she started having brief moments of fear, wanting to go home. After 8 hours in the back of the van, there was no doubt in her mind that she wanted to go home. The only thing that kept her from giving up was curiosity. As far as she could tell from this admittedly poor vantage point, this didn't look like a Fed operation. The van pulled off the highway, onto a frontage road, and into a parking lot. The rear doors of the van opened up, and a couple of women climbed in. Through the open doors, YT could see the Gothic arch logo of a Reverend Wayne's pearly gates. "Oh, you poor baby," one of the women said. The other woman just gasped in horror at her condition. One of them just cradled her head and stroked her hair, letting her sip sweet Kool-Aid from a Dixie cup, while the other tenderly, slowly took the gaffer's tape off. Her shoes had already been removed when she woke up in the back of the van, and no one offered her another pair. And everything had been removed from her coverall. All the good stuff was gone. But they hadn't gone underneath the coverall. She still had the dog tags. And one other thing, a thing between her legs called a dentata. There's no way they could have found that. She has always known that the dog tags were probably a fake thing anyway. Uncle Enzo doesn't just go around giving his war souvenirs to 15-year-old chicks. But they still might have an effect on someone. The two women are named Marla and Bonnie. They are with her all the time. Not only with her, but touching her. Lots of hugs, squeezes, hand-holding, and tousled hair. The first time she goes to the first time she goes to the bathroom, Bonnie goes with her, opening the stall door and actually standing in there with her. YT thinks that Bonnie is worried that she's going to pass out on the toilet or something. But the next time she has to pee, Marla goes with her. She gets no privacy at all. The only problem is that she can't deny that she likes it, in a way. The ride in the van hurt. It really hurt bad. She never felt so lonely in her life. And now she's barefoot and defenseless in an unfamiliar place, and they're giving her what she needs. After she had a few minutes to freshen up, whatever that means, inside the Reverend Wayne's pearly gates, she and Marla and Bonnie climbed into a big stretch van with no windows. The floor was carpeted, but there were no seats inside. Everyone sat on the floor. The van was jammed when they opened the rear doors. 20 people were packed into it, all energetic, beaming youths. It looked impossible. YT shrank away from it, backing right into Marla and Bonnie. But a cheerful roar came up from the van people, white teeth flashing in the dimness, and people began to scrunch out a tiny space for them. She spent most of the next 2 days packed into the van between Bonnie and Marla, holding hands with them constantly, so she couldn't even pick her nose without permission. They sang happy songs until her brain turned to tapioca. They played wacky games. A couple of times every hour, someone in the van would start to babble, just like the Falabalas, just like the Reverend Wayne's Pearly Gates people. The babbling would spread throughout the van like a contagious disease, and soon everyone would be doing it. Everyone except for YT. She couldn't seem to get the hang of it. It just seemed embarrassingly stupid to her. So she just faked it. 3 times a day, they had a chance to eat and eliminate. It always happened in burbclaves. YT could feel them pulling off the interstate, finding their way down twisty development lanes, courts, ways, and circles. A garage door would rise electrically, the van would pull in, the door would shut behind them. They would go into a suburban house, except stripped of furniture and other family touches, and sit on the floor in empty bedrooms, one for boys, one for girls, and eat cake and cookies. This always happened in a totally empty room of the house, but there was always different decor. In one place, flowery countryish wallpaper and a lingering smell of rancid Glade. In another, bluish wallpaper featuring hockey players, football players, basketball players. In another, just plain white walls with old crayon marks on them. Sitting in these empty rooms, YT would study the old furniture scrapes on the floors, the dents in the sheetrock, and muse over them like an archaeologist, wondering about the long-departed families who had once lived here. But toward the end of the ride, she wasn't paying attention anymore. In the van, she could hear nothing but singing and chanting, see nothing but the jammed together faces of her companions. When they stopped for gas, they did it in giant truck stops out in the middle of nowhere, pulling up to the most distant pump island so that no one was near them. And they never stopped driving. They just got relayed from one driver to the next. Finally, they got to a coast. YT could smell it. They spent a few minutes waiting, engine idling, and then the van bumped over some kind of threshold, climbed a few ramps, stopped, set its parking brake. The driver got out and left them all alone in the van for the first time. YT felt glad that the trip was over. Then everything started to rumble, like an engine noise, but a lot bigger. She didn't feel any movement until a few minutes later, when she realized that everything was rocking gently. The van was parked on a ship, and the ship was headed out to sea. It's a real ocean-going ship. An old, shitty, rusty one that probably cost about $5 at the ship junkyard. But it carries cars, and it goes through the water, and it doesn't sink. The ship is just like the van, except bigger, with more people. But they eat the same stuff, sing the same songs, and sleep just as rarely as ever. By now, YT finds it perversely comforting. She knows that she's with a lot of other people like her, and that she's safe. She knows the routine. She knows where she belongs. And so, they finally come to the raft. No one has told YT that this is where they're going, but by now it's obvious. She ought to be scared, but they wouldn't be going to the raft if it was as bad as everyone says. When it starts coming into view, she half expects them to converge on her with gaffer's tape again. But then she figures out it's not necessary. She hasn't been causing trouble. She's been accepted here. They trust her. It gives her a feeling of pride, in a way. And she won't cause trouble on the raft because all she can do is escape from their part of it onto the raft. Oh, geez Louise, that sentence is a salad. And she won't cause trouble on the raft because all she can do is escape from their part of it onto the raft per se. As such, the real Raft, the Raft of 100 Hong Kong B movies and blood-soaked Nipponese comic books. It doesn't take much imagination to think of what happens to a lone 15-year-old blonde American girl on the raft, and these people know it. Sometimes she worries about her mother, and then she hardens her heart and thinks maybe the whole thing will be good for her, shake her up a little, which is what she needs. After Dad left, she just folded up into herself like an origami bird thrown into a fire. There is kind of an outer cloud of small boats surrounding the raft for a distance of a few miles. Almost all of them are fishing boats. Some of them carry men with guns, but they don't fuck around with this ferry. The ferry swings through this outer zone, making a broad turn, finally zeroing in on a white neighborhood on one flank of the raft. Literally white. All of the boats here are clean and new. There's a couple of big rusty boats with Russian lettering on the side, and the ferry pulls up alongside one of them. Ropes are thrown across, then augmented with nets, gangplanks, webs of old discarded tires. This raft thing does not look like good skating territory at all. She wonders if any of the other people on board this ferry are skaters. Doesn't seem likely. Really, they are not her kind of people at all. She has always been a dirty scum dog of the highways, not one of these happy sing-along types. Maybe the raft is just the place for her. They take her down into one of the Russian ships and give her the grossest job of all time, cutting up fish. She does not want a job, has not asked for one, but that's what she gets. Still, no one really talks to her, no one bothers to explain anything, and that makes her reluctant to ask. She has just run into a massive cultural shockwave because most of the people on this ship are old and fat and Russian and don't speak English. For a couple of days, she spends a lot of time sleeping on the job, being prodded awake by the hefty Russian dames who work in this place. She also does some eating. Some of the fish that comes through this place looks pretty rank, but there's a fair amount of salmon. The only way she knows this is from having sushi at the mall. Salmon is the orange-red stuff. So she makes some sushi of her own, munches down on some fresh salmon meat, and it's good. It clears her head a little. Once she gets over the shock of it and settles into a routine, she starts looking around her, watching the other fish-cutting dames, and realizes that this is just like life must be for about 90%, 99% of the people in the world. You're in this place. There's other people all around you, but they don't understand you and you don't understand them. But people do a lot of pointless babbling anyway. In order to stay alive, you have to spend all day, every day, doing stupid, meaningless work. And the only way to get out of it is to quit, cut loose, take a flyer, and go off into the wicked world, where you will be swallowed up and never heard from again. She's not especially good at cutting up fish. The big, stout Russian chicks, stomping, slab-faced babushkas, keep giving her a hassle. They keep hovering, watching her cut with this look on their face like they can't believe what a dork she is. Then they try to show her how to do it the right way, but she's still not so good at it. It's hard, and her hands are cold and stiff all the time. After a couple of frustrating days, they give her a new job, farther down the production line. They turn her into a cafeteria dame, like one of the slop slingers in the high school lunchroom. She works in the galley of one of the big Russian ships, hauling vats of cooked fish stew out to the buffet line, ladling it out into bowls, shoving it across the counter at an unending line consisting of religious fanatics, and more religious fanatics. Except this time around, there seem to be a lot more Asians and hardly any Americans at all. They have a new species here, too. People with antennas coming out of their heads. The antennas look like the ones on cop walkie-talkies. Short, blunt, black rubber whips. They rise up from behind the ear. The first time she sees one of these people, she figures it must be some kind of new Walkman, and she wants to ask the guy where he got it, what he's listening to. But he's a strange guy, stranger than all of the others, with a permanent thousand-yard stare and a bad case of the mumbles, and he ends up giving her the creeps so bad that she just shoves an extra-large dose of stew in his face and hurries him on down the line. Yeah, my lips are getting tied up. From time to time, she actually recognizes one of the people who were in her van, but they don't seem to recognize her. They just look right through her, glassy-eyed, like they've been brainwashed. Like YT was brainwashed. She can't believe it has taken her this long to figure out what they were doing to her. And that just makes her more pissed.
Well, well, of course. Of course, my message receiving thing is going to hiccup and stop receiving messages. That's just good. Thanks so much, Mob Crush. When you work, you're fantastic. When you don't work, you make me want to eat nails. Metal nails, not fingernails. Something that'll really ruin your teeth. I'm gonna get another sip of water here.
Chapter 44. In reality, Port Sherman is a surprisingly tiny little burg, really just a few square blocks. Until the Raft came along, it had a full-time population of a couple of thousand people. Now the population must be pushing 50,000. Hiro has to slow down a bit here because the refuse are all sleeping on the street for the time being, an impediment to traffic. That's okay. It saves his life. Because shortly after he gets into Port Sherman, the wheels on his motorcycle lock up, the spokes become rigid, and the ride gets very bumpy. A couple of seconds after that, the entire bike goes dead, becomes an inert chunk of metal. Not even the engine works. He looks down into the flat screen on top of the fuel tank, wanting to get a status report, but it's just showing snow. The BIOS has crashed. Ashura's possessed his bike. So he abandons it in the middle of the street, starts walking toward the waterfront. Behind him, he can hear the refuse waking up, struggling out of their blankets and sleeping bags, converging over the fallen bike, trying to be the first to claim it. He can hear a deep thumping in his chest, and for a minute he remembers Raven's motorcycle in LA, how he felt it first and heard it later. But there are no motorcycles around here. The sound is coming from above. It's a chopper, the kind that flies. Hiro can smell the seaweed rotting on the beach, he's so close. He comes around a corner and finds himself on the waterfront street, looking straight into the facade of the Spectrum 2000. On the other side is water. The chopper's coming up the fjord, following it inland from the open sea, headed straight for the Spectrum 2000. It's a small one, an agile number with a lot of glass. Hiro can see crosses painted all over it where the red stars used to be. It is brilliant and dazzling in the cool blue light of early morning because it's shedding a trail of stars, blue-white magnesium flares tumbling out of it every few seconds, landing in the water below, where they continue to burn, leaving an astral pathway marked out down the length of the harbor. They aren't there to look cool. They are there to confuse heat-seeking missiles. From where he's standing, he can't see the roof of the hotel because he's looking straight up at it. But he has the feeling that Gurov must be waiting there, on top of the tallest building in Port Sherman, waiting for a dawn evacuation to carry him away into the porcelain sky, carry him away to the raft. Question: why is he being evacuated? And why are they worried about heat-seeking missiles? Hiro realizes, belatedly, that some heavy shit is going on. If he still had the bike, he could ride it right up the fire stairs and find out what's happening. But he doesn't have the bike. A deep thump sounds from the roof of a building on his right. It's an old building, one of the original pioneer structures from 100 years ago. Hiro's knees buckle, his mouth comes open, shoulders hunch involuntarily. He looks toward the sound. And something catches his eye, something small and dark, darting away from the building and up into the air like a sparrow. But when it's 100 yards out over the water, the sparrow catches fire, coughs out a great cloud of sticky yellow smoke, turns into a white fireball, and springs forward. It keeps getting faster and faster, tearing down the center of the harbor, until it passes all the way through the little chopper, in through the windshield and out the back. The chopper turns into a cloud of flame, shedding dark bits of scrap metal, like a phoenix breaking out of its shell. Apparently, Hiro's not the only guy in town who hates Gurov. Now Gurov has to come downstairs and get on a boat. The lobby of the Spectrum 2000 is an armed camp, full of beards with guns. They're still putting their defense together. More soldiers are dragging themselves out of their coin lockers, pulling on their jackets, grabbing their guns. A swarthy guy, probably a Tatar sergeant left over from the Red Army, is running around the lobby in a modified Soviet Marines uniform, screaming at people, shoving them this way and that. Gurov may be a holy man, but he can't walk on water. He'll have to come out to the waterfront street, make his way 2 blocks down to get to the gate that admits him to the secured pier, and get on board the Kodiak Queen, which is waiting for him, black smoke starting to cough out of its stacks, lights starting to come on. Just down the pier from the Kodiak Queen is the Kowloon, which is the big Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong boat. Hiro turns his back on the Spectrum 2000 and starts running up and down the waterfront streets, scanning the logos until he sees the one he wants, Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong. They don't want to let him in. He flashes his passport, the door is open. The guard is Chinese, but speaks a bit of English. This is a measure of how weird things are in Port Sherman. They have a guard on the door. Usually, Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong is an open country, always looking for new citizens, even if they are the poorest refuse. Sorry, the guard says in a reedy, insincere voice. I did not know. He points to Hiro's passport. The franchulette is literally a breath of fresh air. It doesn't have that third world ambiance, doesn't smell like urine at all, which means it must be the local headquarters, or close to it, because most of Hong Kong's Port Sherman real estate probably consists of nothing more than a gunman hogging a payphone in a lobby. But this place is spacious, clean, and nice. A few hundred refuse stare at him through the windows, held at bay not by the mere plate glass, but by the eloquent promise of the three rat thing hutches lined up against one wall. From the looks of it, two of those have just been moved in recently. Pays to beef up your security when the raft is coming through. Hiro proceeds to the counter. A man is talking on the phone in Cantonese, which means that he is, in fact, shouting. Hiro recognizes him as the Port Sherman proconsul. He is deeply involved in this little chat, but he has definitely noticed Hiro's swords, is watching them carefully. We are very busy, the man says, hanging up. Now you are a lot busier, Hiro says. I would like to charter your boat, the Kowloon. It's very expensive, the man says. I just threw away a brand new top of the line motorcycle in the middle of the street because I didn't feel like pushing it half a block to the garage, Hiro says. I am on an expense account that would blow your mind. It's broken. I appreciate your politeness in not wanting to come out and just say no, Hiro says. But I happen to know that it is, in fact, not broken, and so I must consider your refusal equivalent to a no. It is not available, the man says. Someone else is using it. It has not yet left the pier, Hiro says. So you can cancel that engagement using one of the excuses you have just given me, and then I will pay you more money. We cannot do this, the man says. Then I will go out into the street and inform the refuse that the Kowloon is leaving for LA in exactly 1 hour, and that they have enough room to take 20 refuse along with them. First come, first served, Hiro says. No, the man says. I will tell them to contact you personally. Where do you want to go on the Kowloon? The man says. The raft. Oh, well, why didn't you say so? The man says. That's where our other passenger is going. You've got someone else who wants to go to the raft? That's what I said. Your passport, please. Hiro hands it over. The man shoves it into a slot. Hiro's name, personal data, and mugshots are digitally transferred into the franchulette's BIOS, and with a little bit of key pounding, the man persuades it to spit out a laminated photo ID card. You get onto the pier with this, he says. It's good for 6 hours. You make your own deal with the other passenger. After that, I never want to see you again. What if I need more consular services? I can always go out and tell people, the man says, that a nigger with swords is out raping Chinese refugees. Hmm. This isn't exactly the best service I've ever had at a Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong. This is not a normal situation, the man says. Look out the window, asshole. Not much has apparently changed down at the waterfront. The orthos have organized their defense in the lobby of the Spectrum 2000. Furniture has been overturned, barricades set up. In the hotel itself, Hiro presumes furious activity is going on. It's still not clear whom the orthos are defending themselves against. Making his way through the waterfront area, Hiro doesn't see much. Just more Chinese refuse and baggy clothes. It's just that some of them look a lot more alert than others. They have a whole different affect. Most of the Chinese have their eyes on the mud in front of their feet and their minds on something else. But some of them are just strolling up and down the street, looking all around, alertly, and most of these people happen to be young men wearing bulky jackets. and haircuts that are from a whole other stylistic universe than what the others are sporting. There is evidence of styling gel. The entrance to the rich people's pier is sandbagged, barbed wired, and guarded. Hiro approaches slowly, his hands in plain sight, and shows his pass to the head guard, who's the only white person Hiro has seen in Port Sherman. And that gets him onto the pier. Just like that. Like the Hong Kong franchulette, it's empty, quiet, and doesn't stink. It bobs up and down gently on the tide, in a way that Hiro finds relaxing. It's really just a train of rafts, plank platforms built over the floating hunks of styrofoam, and if it weren't guarded, it would probably end up getting dragged out and lashed onto the raft. Unlike a normal marina, it's not quiet and isolated. Usually, people moor their boats, lock them up, and leave. Here, at least one person is hanging out on each boat, drinking coffee, keeping their weapons in plain sight, watching Hiro very intently as he strolls up the pier. Every few seconds, the pier thunders with footsteps, and one or two Russians run past Hiro, making for the Kodiak Queen. They are all young men, all sailor/soldier types, and they're diving onto the Kodiak Queen as if it's the last boat out of hell, being shouted at by officers, running to their stations, frantically attending to their sailor chores. Things are a lot calmer on the Kowloon. It's guarded too, but most of the people appear to be waiters and stewards, wearing snappy uniforms with brass buttons and white gloves. Uniforms that are intended to be used indoors, in pleasant, climate-controlled dining rooms. A few crew members are visible from place to place, their black hair slicked back, clad in dark windbreakers to protect them from the cold and spray. Hiro can only see one man on the Kowloon who appears to be a passenger. A tall, slender Caucasian in a dark suit, strolling around, chatting into a portable telephone. Probably some industry jerk who wants to go out for a day cruise, look at the refuse on the raft while he's sitting in a dining room having a gourmet dinner. Hiro's about halfway down the pier when all hell breaks loose on shore, in front of the Spectrum 2000. It starts with a long series of heavy machine gun bursts that don't appear to do much damage, but do clear the street pretty fast. 99% of the refuse just evaporate. The others, the young men Hiro noticed, pull interesting high-tech weapons out of their jackets and disappear into doorways and buildings. Hiro picks up the pace a little, starts walking backward down the pier, trying to get some of the larger vessels in between him and the action so he doesn't get hit by a stray burst. A fresh breeze comes off the water and down the pier. Passing by the Kowloon, it picks up the smell of bacon frying and coffee brewing, and Hiro can't help but meditate on the fact that his last meal was half of a cheap beer in a Kelly's Tap in a snoozin' cruise. The scene in front of the Spectrum 2000 has devolved into a generalized roar of unbelievably loud white noise as all the people inside and outside of the hotel fire their weapons back and forth across the street. Something touches his shoulder. Hiro turns to brush it away, sees that he's looking down at a short Chinese waitress who's come down the pier from the Kowloon. Having gotten his attention, she puts her hands back where they were originally, to wit, plastered over her ears. "You hero protagonist?" she mouths, basically inaudible over the ridiculous noise of the firefight. Hiro nods. She nods back, steps away from him, jerks her head toward the Kowloon. With her hands plastered over her ears this way, it looks like some kind of a folk dance move. Hiro follows her down the pier. Maybe they're going to let him charter the Kowloon after all. She ushers him onto the aluminum gangplank. As he's walking across it, he looks up to one of the higher decks, where a couple of the crew members are hanging out in their dark windbreakers. One of them is leaning against a railing, watching the firefight through binoculars. Another one, an older one, approaches him, leans over to examine his back, slaps him a couple of times between the shoulder blades. The guy drops his binoculars to see who's pounding him on the back. His eyes are not Chinese. The older guy says something to him, gestures at his throat. He's not Chinese either. The binocular guy nods, reaches up with one hand, and presses a lapel switch. The next time he turns around, a word is written across his back in neon green electropigment. Mafia. The older guy turns away. His windbreaker says the same thing. Hiro turns around in the middle of the gangplank. There are 20 crew members in plain sight all around him. Suddenly, their black windbreakers all say Mafia. Suddenly, they are all armed. I think it's a good book, too. It's very entertaining. There are parts of it that sort of, drag, but they're all kind of just building detail, fleshing out the world. It's really good. Neal Stephenson knocked it out of the park with Snow Crash. Where I just lost my page. Why would I do this? Why would I do this? Oh shoot, I have more time than I thought. Well, I guess I will fake it. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to chapter 50 because that's a lot of pages to cover. Some chapters are like a page and a half long, other chapters are like 30 pages. So it's it's hard to gauge ahead too easily without literally flipping through and double checking. Like the next 3 chapters or so are really short, and then there's like two long ones back to back. All right, another sip of water here. Chapter 45. I was planning to get in touch with Mr. Lee's Greater Hong Kong and file a complaint about their proconsul here in Port Sherman, Hiro jokes. He was very uncooperative this morning when I insisted on renting this boat out from under you. Hiro is sitting in the first class dining room of the Kowloon. On the other side of the white linen tablecloth is the man Hiro had previously pegged as the industry creep on vacation. He's impeccably dressed in a black suit, and he has a glass eye. He has not bothered to introduce himself, as though he's expecting Hiro to know who he is already. The man does not seem amused by Hiro's story. He seems rather nonplussed. So? Don't see any reason to file a complaint now, Hiro says. Why not? Well, because now I understand his reluctance not to displace you guys. How come? You got money, don't you? Yeah, but... Oh, the man with the glass eye says, and allows himself a sort of forced smile. Because we're mafia, you're saying? Yeah, Hiro says, feeling his face get hot. Nothing like making a total dickhead out of yourself. Nothing in the world like it, no siree, Bob. Outside, the gun battle is just a dim roar. This dining room is insulated from noise, water, wind, and hot flying lead by a double layer of remarkably thick glass, and the space between the panes is full of something cool and gelatinous. The roar does not seem as steady as it used to be. Fucking machine guns, the man says. I hate 'em. Maybe one out of 1,000 rounds actually hits something worth hitting, and they kill my ears. You want some coffee or something? That'd be great. We got a big buffet coming up soon. Bacon, eggs, fresh fruit you wouldn't believe. The guy that Hiro saw earlier, up on the deck, pounding Binocular Man on the back, sticks his head into the room. Excuse me, boss, but we're moving into, like, the third phase of our plan. Just thought you'd want to know. Thank you, Livio. Let me know when the Ivans make it to the pier. The guy sips his coffee, notices Hiro looking confused. See, we got a plan, and the plan is divided up into different phases. Yeah, I got that. The first phase was immobilization, taking out their chopper. Then we had phase 2, which was making them think we were trying to kill them in the hotel. I think this phase succeeded wonderfully. Me too. Thank you. Another important part of this phase was getting your ass in here, which is also done. I'm part of this plan? The man with the glass eye smiles crisply. If you were not part of this plan, you would be dead. So you know I was coming to Port Sherman? You know that chick YT, the one you've been using to spy on us? Yeah, no point in denying it. Well, we've been using her to spy on you. Why? Why the hell do you care about me? That would be a tangent from our main conversation, which is about all the phases of the plan. Okay, we just finished phase two. Now, in phase three, which is ongoing, we allow them to think that they are making an incredible heroic escape, running down the street toward the pier. Phase four, shouts Livio, the lieutenant. Scusi, the man with the glass eye says, scooting his chair back, folding his napkin back onto the table. He gets up and walks out of the dining room. Hiro follows him up above decks. A couple of dozen Russians are all trying to force their way through the gate onto the pier. Only a few of them can get through at once, and so they end up strung out over a couple of 100 feet, all running toward the safety of the Kodiak Queen. But a dozen or so manage to stay together in a clump, a group of soldiers forming a human shield around a smaller cluster of men at the center. Bigwigs, the man with the glass eye says, shaking his head philosophically. They all run crab-like down the pier, bent down as far as they can go, firing the occasional covering burst of machine gun fire back into Port Sherman. The man with the glass eye is squinting against a cool, sudden breeze. He turns to Hiro with a hint of a grin. Check this out, he says, and presses a button on a little black box in his hand. The explosion is like a single drumbeat, coming from everywhere at once. Hiro can feel it coming up out of the water, shaking his feet. There's no big flame or cloud of smoke, but there is a sort of twin geyser effect that shoots out from underneath the Kodiak Queen, sending jets of white, steamy water upward like unfolding wings. The wings collapse in a sudden downpour, and then the Kodiak Queen seems shockingly low in the water. Low, and getting lower. All the men who are running down the pier suddenly stop in their tracks. Now, Binocular Man mumbles into his lapel. There are some smaller explosions down on the pier. The entire pier buckles and writhes like a snake in the water. One segment in particular, the segment with the bigwigs on it, is rocking and seesawing violently, smoke rising from both ends. It has been blown loose from the rest of the pier. All of its occupants fall down in the same direction as it jerks sideways and begins to move, yanked out of place. Hiro can see the tow cable rising up out of the water as it is stretched tight, running a couple of 100 feet to a small open boat with a big motor on it, which is now pulling out of the harbor. There's still a dozen bodyguards on the segment. One of them sizes up the situation, aims his AK-47 across the water at the boat that's towing them, and loses his brains. There's a sniper on the top deck of the Kowloon. All the other bodyguards throw their guns into the water. Time for phase five, the man with the glass eye says. A big fucking breakfast. By the time he and Hiro have sat back down in the dining room, the Kowloon has pulled away from the pier and is headed down the fjord, following a course parallel to the smaller boat that is towing the segment. As they eat, they can look out the window, across a few 100 yards of open water, and see the segment keeping pace with them. All the bigwigs and bodyguards are on their asses now, keeping their centers of gravity low as the segment bucks nastily. When we get farther away from land, the waves get bigger, the man with the glass eye says. I hate that shit. All I want is to hang on to the breakfast long enough to tamp it down with some lunch. Amen, says Livio, heaping up some scrambled eggs onto his plate. Are you going to pick those guys up, Hiro says, or just let them stay out there for a while? Fuck 'em. Let 'em freeze their asses off. Then when we bring 'em onto the boat, they'll be ready for it. Won't put up too much of a fight. Hey, maybe they'll even talk to us. Everyone seems pretty hungry. For a while, they just dig into breakfast. After a while, the man with the glass eye breaks the ice by announcing how great the food is, and everyone agrees. Hiro figures it's okay to talk now. I was wondering why you guys were interested in me. Hiro figures that this is always a good thing to know in the case of the Mafia. We're all in the same happy gang, the man with the glass eye says. Which gang is that? Lagos's gang. Huh? Well, it's not really his gang, but he's the guy who put it together. The nucleus around which it formed. How and why and what are you talking about? Okay. He shoves his plate away from him, folds up his napkin, puts it on the table. Lagos had all these ideas. Ideas about all kinds of stuff. So I noticed. He had stacks all over the place on all different topics. Stacks where he would pull together knowledge from all over the fucking map and tie it all together. He had these things stashed here and there around the metaverse, waiting for the information to become useful. More than one of them? Hiro says. Supposedly. Well, a few years ago, Lagos approached L. Bob Rife. He did? Yeah. See, Rife has a million programmers working for him. He was paranoid that they were stealing his data. I know that he was bugging their houses and so on. The reason you know that is because you found it in Lagos's stack. And the reason Lagos bothered to look it up is because he was doing market research, looking for someone who might pay him hard cash for the stuff he dug up in the Babel/Infocalypse stack. He thought, Hiro says, that L. Bob Rife might have a use for some viruses. Right. See, I don't understand all this shit. But I guess he found an old virus or something that was aimed at the elite thinkers. The technological priesthood, Hiro says. The infocrats. It wiped out the whole infocracy of Sumer. Whatever. That's crazy, Hiro says. That's like if you find out your employees are stealing ballpoint pens, you take them out and kill them. He wouldn't be able to use it without destroying all his programmers' minds. In its original form, the man with the glass eye says, but the whole point is, Lagos wanted to do research on it. Informational warfare research. Bingo. He wanted to isolate this thing and modify it so it could be used to control the programmers without blowing their brains sky high. And, did it work? Who knows? Rife stole Lagos's idea, just took it and ran with it. And after that, Lagos had no idea what Rife did with it. But a couple of years later, he started getting worried about a lot of stuff he was seeing. Like the explosive growth in Reverend Wayne's pearly gates. And these Ruskies who speak in tongues. And the fact that Rife was digging up this old city. Eridu. Yeah, and that radio astronomy thing. Lagos had a lot of stuff he was worried about. So he began to approach people. He approached us. He approached that girl you used to go out with. Juanita. Yeah, nice girl. And he approached Mr. Lee. So you might say that a few different people have been working on this little project. It's all coming together now. Slowly but surely, we're getting there. We're figuring out just what the hell is going on. Okay, we've got like a chapter that has an entire sentence composed of the F word. Let's see. Definitely can get to chapter 48. Oh, shit's gonna get real soon. I mean, it's in a constant state of realitude, but let's. Shit's really gonna get real. I mean, for serious. It's gonna get bonkers. Bonkers. It's gonna get. Deep breaths. Chapter 46. Where'd they go? Hiro says. Everyone's already looking for the float, as though they all noticed at once that it was missing. Finally, they see it, a quarter-mile behind them, dead in the water. The bigwigs and the bodyguards are standing up now, all looking in the same direction. The speedboat is circling around to retrieve it. They must have figured out a way to detach the tow cable, Hiro says.
Not likely, the man with the glass eye says. It was attached to the bottom, under the water, and it's a steel cable, so there's no way they could cut it.
Hiro sees another small craft bobbing on the water, about halfway between the Russians and the speedboat that was towing them. It's not obvious, because it's tiny, close to the water, done up in dull, natural colors. It's a one-man kayak, carrying a long-haired man.
Shit, Livio says. Where the hell did he come from?
The kayaker looks behind himself for a few moments, reading the waves, then suddenly turns back around and begins to paddle hard, accelerating, glancing back every few strokes. A big wave is coming, and just as it swells up underneath the kayak, he's matching its speed. The kayak stays on top of the wave and shoots forward like a missile, riding the swell, suddenly going twice as fast as anything else on the water. Digging at the wave with one end of his paddle, the kayaker makes a few crude changes in his direction. Then he parks the paddle athwart the kayak, reaches down inside, and hauls out a small dark object, a tube about 4 feet long, which he hoists up to one shoulder. He and the speedboat shoot past each other, going in opposite directions, separated by a gap of only about 20 feet. Then the speedboat blows up. The Kowloon has overshot the site of all this action by a few thousand yards. It's pulling around into as tight a turn as a vessel of this size can handle, trying to throw a 180 so it can go back and deal with the Russians and, somewhat more problematically, with Raven. Raven is paddling back toward his buddies.
He's such an asshole, Livio says. What's he gonna do? Towed him out to the raft behind his fucking kayak?
This gives me the creeps, the man with the glass eye says. Make sure we got some guys up there with stingers. They must have a chopper coming or something.
No other ships on the radar, says one of the other soldiers coming in from the bridge. Just us and them. And no choppers either.
You know Raven carries a nuke, right? Hiro says.
So I heard. But the kayak's just not big enough. It's tiny. I can't believe you'd go out into sea like in something like that.
A mountain is growing out of the sea, a bubble of black water that keeps rising and broadening. Well behind the bobbing raft, a black tower has appeared, jutting vertically out of the water, a pair of wings sprouting from its top. The tower keeps getting taller, the wings getting higher out of the water, as before and aft. As before and aft, the mountain rises and shapes itself. Red stars and a few numbers. But no one has to read the numbers to know it's a submarine. A nuclear missile submarine. Then it stops. So close to the Russians on their little raft that Gurov and friends can practically jump onto it. Raven paddles toward them, cutting through the waves like a glass knife.
Fuck me,
The man with the glass eye says. He is utterly astounded.
fuck me, fuck me, fuck me. Uncle Enzo's gonna be pissed.
You couldn't have known, Livio says. Shall we shoot at him?
Before the man with the glass eye can make a policy decision, the deck gun on the top of the nuke sub opens up. The first shell misses them by just a few yards.
Okay, we got a rapidly evolving situation. Hiro, you come with me.
The crew of the Kowloon has already sized up the situation and placed their bets on the nuclear submarine. They are running up and down the rails, dropping large fiberglass capsules into the water. The capsules break open to reveal bright orange folds, which blossom into life rafts. Once the deck gunners on the nuke sub figure out how to hit the Kowloon, the situation begins to evolve even more rapidly. The Kowloon can't decide whether to sink, burn, or simply disintegrate, so it does all three at once. By that time, most of the people who were on it have made their way onto her life raft. They all bob on the water, zip themselves into orange survival suits, and watch the nuke sub. Raven is the last person to go below decks on the submarine. He spends a minute or two removing some gear from his kayak, a few items in bags, and one 8-foot spear with a translucent leaf-shaped head. Before he disappears into the hatch, he turns toward the wreckage of the Kowloon and holds the harpoon up over his head, a gesture of triumph and a promise all at once. Then he's gone. A couple of minutes later, the submarine is gone too.
That guy gives me the creeps,
The man with the glass eye says. Oh yeah, Raven's a bouse. All right, I got about half an hour here. Let me math out. Let me see. Let me see. Let me see. Uh, Okay, I should be able to definitely get to chapter 49 or so, which means I'm only going to have like 2 more sessions. For this book in particular, anyway. Well, maybe 3 on the outside, but they'll be short. Or one of them will be extremely short. We'll see. We'll see. Take another sip of water here. Chapter 47. Once it starts coming clear to her, again, that these people are all twisted freaks, she starts to notice other things about them. For example, the whole time, no one ever looks her in the eye. Especially the men. No sex at all in these guys. They've got it pushed so far down inside of them. She can understand why they don't look at the fat babushkas. But she's a 15-year-old American chick, and she is used to getting the occasional look. Not here. Until she looks up from her big vat of fish one day and finds that she's looking into some guy's chest. And when she follows his chest upward to his neck, and his neck all the way up to his face, she sees dark eyes staring right back at her, right over the top of the counter. He's got something written on his forehead. Poor impulse control. Which is kind of scary. Sexy, too. It gives him a certain measure of romance that none of these other people have. She was expecting the raft to be dark and dangerous, and instead it's just like working where her mother works. This guy is the first person she's seen around this place who really looks like he belongs on the raft. And he's got the look down, too. Incredibly rank style. Although he has a long, wispy mustache that doesn't do much for his face. Doesn't bring out his features well at all.
Do you take the nasty stuff? One fish head or two?
She says, dangling the ladle picturesquely. She always talks trash to people because none of them can understand what she's saying. I'll take whatever you're offering, the guy says, in English, sort of a crisp accent.
I'm not offering anything, she says, but if you want to stand there and browse, that's cool.
He stands there and browses for a while, long enough that people farther back in line stand up on tiptoe to see what the problem is. But when they see that the problem is this particular individual, they get down off their toes real fast, hunch down, sort of blend into the mass of fishy-smelling wool. What's for dessert today? The guy asks. Got anything sweet for me?
We don't believe in dessert. YT says. It's a fucking sin, remember?
Depends on your cultural orientation.
Oh, yeah? What culture are you oriented to?
I am an Aleut.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
That's because we've been fucked over, the big scary Aleut says, worse than any other people in history.
Sorry to hear that, YT says. So, do you want me to serve up some fish, or are you gonna stay hungry?
The big Aleut stares at her for a while. Then he jerks his head sideways and says, Come on, let's get the fuck out of here.
What, and skip out on this cool job?
He grins ridiculously. I can find you a better job.
In this job, do I get to leave my clothes on?
Come on, we're going now, he says, those eyes burning into her. She tries to ignore a sudden warm, tense feeling down between her legs. She starts following him down the cafeteria line, heading for a gap where she can exit into the dining area. The head babushka bitch comes stomping out from in back, hollers at her in some incomprehensible language. YT turns to look back. She feels a pair of big hands slide up her sides, coming up to her armpits, and she pulls her arms to her sides, trying to stop it. But it's no good. The hands come all the way up and keep lifting, keep rising into the air, bringing her with them. The big guy hoists her right up over the counter like she's a 3-year-old and sets her down next to him. YT turns back around to see the head babushka bitch, but she's frozen in a mixture of surprise, fear, and sexual outrage. But in the end, fear wins out. She averts her eyes, turns away, and goes to replace YT at a VAT position number 9.
Thanks for the lift,
YT says, her voice wowing and fluttering ridiculously.
Didn't you want to eat something?
I was thinking of going out anyway, he says.
Going out? Where do you go out on the raft?
Come on, I'll show you. He leads her down passageways and up steep steel stairways and out onto the deck. It's getting close to twilight. I just lost my place in the page. Oh my god. There we go. It's getting close to twilight. The control tower of the Enterprise looms hard and black against a deep gray sky that's getting dark and gloomy, so fast that it seems darker now than it will at midnight. But for now, none of the lights are on, and that's all there is, black steel and slate sky. She follows him down the deck of the ship to the stern. From here, it's a 30-foot drop to the water. They are looking out across the prosperous, clean, white neighborhood of the Russian people, separated from the squalid dark tangle of the raft per se by a wide canal patrolled by gun-toting blackrobes. There's no stairway or rope ladder here, but there is a thick rope hanging from the railing. The big Aleut guy hauls up a chunk of rope and drapes it under one arm and over one leg in a quick motion. Then he throws one arm around YT's waist, gathering her in the crook of his arm, leans back, and falls off the ship. She absolutely refuses to scream. She feels the rope stop his body, feels his arm squeeze her so tight she chokes for a moment, and then she's hanging there, hanging in the crook of his arm. She's got her arms down to her side, defiant. But for the hell of it, she leans into him, wraps her arms around his neck, puts her head on his shoulder, and hangs on tight. He repels them down the rope, and soon they are standing on the sanitized, prosperous Russian version of the raft.
What's your name, anyway?
She says. Dmitri Ravenov, he says, better known as Raven. Oh, shit. The connections between boats are tangled and unpredictable. To get from point A to point B, you have to wander all over the place. But Raven knows where he's going. Occasionally, he reaches out, grabs her hand, but he doesn't yank her around even though she's going a lot slower than he is. Every so often, he looks back at her with a grin, like, I could hurt you, but I won't. They come to a place where the Russian neighborhood is joined to the rest of the raft by a wide plank bridge guarded by Uzi dudes. Raven ignores them, takes YT's hand again, and walks right across the bridge with her. YT hardly has time to think through the implications of this before it hits her. She looks around, sees all these gaunt Asians, staring back at her like she's a five-course meal, and realizes, I'm on the raft. Actually on the raft.
These are Hong Kong Vietnamese, Raven says. Started out in Vietnam, came to Hong Kong as boat people after the war there. So they've been living on sampans for a couple of generations now. Don't be scared, this isn't dangerous for you.
I don't think I can find my way back here, YT says.
Relax, he says. I've never lost a girlfriend.
Have you ever had a girlfriend?
Raven throws back his head and laughs.
A lot in the old days. Not as many in the past few years.
Oh, yeah? The old days? Is that when you got your tattoo?
Yeah, I'm an alcoholic. Used to get in a lot of trouble. Been sober for 8 years.
And how come everyone's scared of you?
Raven turns to her, smiles broadly, shrugs.
Oh, because I'm an incredibly ruthless, efficient, cold-blooded killer, you know.
YT laughs. So does Raven.
What's your job?
YT says.
I'm a harpooner, he says.
Like in Moby Dick?
YT likes this idea. She read that book in school. Most of the people in her class, even the power tools, thought that the book was totally entrenched. But she liked all the stuff about harpooning.
Nah, compared to me, those Moby Dicksters were faggots.
What kind of stuff do you harpoon?
You name it.
From there on out, she just looks at him, or at inanimate objects, because otherwise she wouldn't see anything except thousands of dark eyes staring back at her. In that way, it's a big change from being a slop slinger for the repressed. Part of it is just because she's so different. But part of it is that there's no privacy on the raft. You make your way around by hopping from one boat to the next. But each boat is home to about 3 dozen people, so it's like you're constantly walking through people's living rooms, and bathrooms, and bedrooms. Naturally, they look. They tromp across a makeshift platform built on oil drums. A couple of Vietnamese dudes are arguing or haggling over something. Looks like a slab of fish. The one who's turned toward them sees them coming. His eyes flicker across YT without pausing, fix on Raven, and go wide. He steps back. The guy he's talking to, who has his back to them, turns around and literally jumps into the air, letting out a suppressed grunt. Both of them back well out of Raven's path. And then she figures out something important. These people aren't looking at her. They're not even giving her a second glance. They're all looking at Raven. And it's not just a case of celebrity watching or something like that. All of these raft dudes, these tough, scary homeboys of the sea, are scared shitless of this guy. And she's on a date with him. And it's just started. Suddenly, walking through another Vietnamese living room, YT has a flashback to the most excruciating conversation she ever had, which was a year ago when her mother tried to give her advice on what to do if a boy got fresh with her. Yeah, Mom, right. I'll keep that in mind. Yeah, I'll be sure to remember that. YT knew that the advice was worthless, and this just goes to show she was right. Chapter 48. There are 4 men in the life raft. Hero protagonist, self-employed stringer for the Central Intelligence Corporation, whose practice used to be limited to so-called dry operations, meaning that he sat around and soaked up information and then later spat it back into the library, the CIC database, without ever actually doing anything. Now his practice has become formidably wet. Hiro is armed with two swords and a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, known colloquially as a 9, with two ammunition clips, each carrying 11 rounds. Vic, unspecified last name. If there was still such a thing as income tax, then every year when Vic filled out his 1040 form he would put down, as his occupation, sniper. In classic sniper style, Vic is reticent, unobtrusive. He is armed with a long, large caliber rifle with a bulky mechanism mounted on its top, where a telescopic sight might be found if Vic were not at the leading edge of his profession. The exact nature of this device is not obvious, but Hiro presumes that it is an exquisitely precise sensor package, with fine crosshairs superimposed on the middle. Vic may safely be presumed to be carrying additional small concealed weapons. Elliot Chung. Elliot used to be the skipper of a boat called the Kowloon. At the moment, he is between jobs. Elliot grew up in Watts, and when he speaks English, he sounds like a black guy. Genetically speaking, he is entirely Chinese. He is fluent in both black and white English, as well as Cantonese, Taxilingua, and some Vietnamese, Spanish, and Mandarin. Elliot is armed with a .44 Magnum revolver, which he carried on board the Kowloon just for the halibut, i.e., he used it to execute halibut before passengers hauled them on board. Halibut grow very large, and can thrash so violently that they can easily kill people who hook them. Hence, it is prudent to fire a number of shells through their heads before taking them on board. This is the only reason Elliot carries a weapon. The other defensive needs of the Kowloon were seen to by crew members who were specialists in that kind of thing. Fisheye. This is the man with the glass eye. He will only identify himself by this nickname. He is armed with a large, fat, black suitcase. The suitcase is massively constructed, with built-in wheels, and weighs somewhere between 300 pounds and a metric ton, as Hiro discovers when he tries to move it. Its weight turns the normally flat bottom of the life raft into a puckered cone. The suitcase has a noteworthy attachment, a flexible 3-inch thick cable or hose or something, a couple of meters long, that emerges from one corner, runs up the sloping floor of the life raft, over the edge, and trails in the water. At the end of this mysterious tentacle is a hunk of metal about the size of a wastebasket, but so finely sculpted into so many narrow fins and veins that it appears to have a surface area the size of Delaware. Hiro only saw this thing out of the water for a few chaotic moments when it was being transferred into the life raft. At that time, it was glowing red hot. Since then, it has lurked below the surface, light gray, impossible to see clearly because the water around it is forever churning in a full, roiling boil. Fist-sized bubbles of steam coalesce amid its fractal tracery of hot veins and pummel the surface of the ocean, ceaselessly, all day and all night. The powerless life raft, sloshing around the North Pacific, emits a vast, spreading plume of steam like that of an iron horse, chugging full blast over the continental divide. Neither Hiro nor Elliot ever mentions, or even notices, the by now obvious fact that Fisheye is traveling with a small, self-contained nuclear power source, almost certainly radiothermal isotopes like the ones that power the rat thing. As long as Fisheye refuses to notice this fact, it would be rude for them to bring it up. All of the participants are clad in bright orange padded suits that cover their entire bodies. They are the North Pacific version of life vests. They are bulky and awkward, but Elliot Chung likes to say that in northern waters, the only thing a life vest does is make your corpse float. The lifeboat is an inflatable raft about 10 feet long that does not come equipped with a motor. It has a tent-like waterproof canopy that they can zip up all the way around, turning it into a sealed capsule so that the water stays out even in the most violent weather. For a couple of days, a powerful chill wind coming down off the mountains drives them out of Oregon, down, out toward open water. Elliot explains, cheerfully, that this lifeboat was invented back in the old days, when they had navies and coast guards that would come and rescue stranded travelers. All you had to do was float and be orange. Fisheye has a walkie-talkie, but it is a short-range device. And Hiro's computer is capable of jacking into the net, but in this regard it functions much like a cellular telephone. It doesn't work out in the middle of nowhere. When the weather is extremely rainy, they sit under the canopy. When it's less rainy, they sit above it. They all have ways of passing the time. Hiro dicks around with his computer, naturally. Being stranded on a life raft in the Pacific is a perfect venue for a hacker. Vic reads and rereads a soaked paperback novel that he had in a pocket of his Mafia windbreaker when the Kowloon got blown out from under him. These days of waiting are much easier for him. As a professional sniper, he knows how to kill time. Elliot looks at things with his binoculars, even though there is very little to look at. He spends a lot of time messing around with the raft, fretting about it in the way that boat captains do. And he does a lot of fishing. They have plenty of stored food on the raft, but the occasional fresh halibut and salmon are nice to eat. Fisheye has taken what appears to be an instruction manual from the heavy black suitcase. It is a miniature 3-ring binder with pages of laser-printed text. The binder is just a cheap, unmarked one, bought from a stationery store. In these respects, it is perfectly familiar to Hiro. It bears the earmarks of a high-tech product that is still under development. All technical devices require documentation of a sort, but this stuff can only be written by the techies who are doing the actual product development, and they absolutely hate it. Always put the docs question off to the very last minute. Then they type up some material on a word processor, run it off the laser printer, send the departmental secretary out for a cheap binder, and that's that. But this only occupies Fisheye for a little while. He spends the rest of the time just staring off at the horizon, as though he's expecting Sicily to heave into view. It doesn't. He is despondent over the failure of his mission, and spends a lot of time mumbling under his breath, trying to find a way to salvage it. "If you don't mind my asking," Hiro says, "what was your mission anyway?" Fisheye thinks this one over for a while.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. Nominally, my objective is to get a 15-year-old girl back from these assholes. So, my tactic was to take a bunch of their bigwigs hostage, and then arrange a trade.
"Who's this 15-year-old girl?" Fisheye shrugs.
You know her. It's YT.
"Is that really your whole objective?"
The important thing is, Hiro, that you have to understand the Mafia way. And the Mafia way is that we pursue larger goals under the guise of personal relationships. So, for example, when you were a pizza guy, you didn't deliver pizzas fast because you made more money that way or because it was some kind of fucking policy. You did it because you were carrying out a personal covenant between Uncle Enzo and every customer. This is how we avoid the trap of self-perpetuating ideology. Ideology is a virus. So, getting this chick back is more than just getting a chick back. It's the concrete manifestation of an abstract policy goal. And we like concrete. Right, Vic?
Vic allows himself a judicious sneer and a deep grinding laugh. "What's the abstract policy goal in this case?" Hiro says.
Not my department, Fisheye says. But I think Uncle Enzo is real pissed at L. Bob Rife.
Hiro is messing around in Flatland. He is doing this partly to conserve the computer's batteries. Rendering a 3-dimensional office takes a lot of processors working full time, while a simple 2-dimensional desktop display requires minimal power. But his real reason for being in Flatland is that hero protagonist, last of the freelance hackers, is hacking. And when hackers are hacking, they don't mess around with the superficial world of metaverses and avatars. They descend below this surface layer and into the netherworld of code and tangled namshubs that supports it. where everything that you see in the metaverse, no matter how lifelike and beautiful and three-dimensional, reduces to a simple text file, a series of letters on an electronic page. It is a throwback to the days when people programmed computers through primitive teletypes and IBM punch cards. Since then, pretty and user-friendly programming tools have been developed. It's possible to program a computer now by sitting at your desk in the metaverse and manually connecting little pre-programmed units, like Tinker Toys. But a real hacker would never use such techniques, any more than a master auto mechanic would try to fix a car by sliding in behind the steering wheel and watching the idiot lights on the dashboard. Hiro does not know what he is doing, what he is preparing for. That's okay, though. Most of the programming is a matter of laying groundwork, building structures of words that seem to have no particular connection to the task at hand. He knows one thing. The metaverse has now become a place where you can get killed, or at least have your brain reamed out to the point where you might as well be dead. This is a radical change in the nature of the place. Guns have come to paradise. It serves them right, he realizes now. They made the place too vulnerable. They figured that the worst thing that could happen was that a virus might get transferred into your computer and force you to ungoggle and reboot your system. Maybe destroy a little data if you were stupid enough not to install any medicine. Therefore, the metaverse is wide open and undefended, like airports in the days before bombs and metal detectors, like elementary schools in the days before maniacs with assault rifles. Anyone could go in and do anything that they want to. There are no cops. You can't defend yourself. You can't chase the bad people. It's going to take a lot of work to change that. A fundamental rebuilding of the whole metaverse, carried out on a planet-wide, corporate level. In the meantime, there may be a role for individuals who know their way around the place. A few hacks can make a lot of difference in this situation. A freelance hacker could get a lot of shit done, years before the giant software factories bestir themselves to deal with the problem. The virus that ate through DeFivid's brain was a string of binary information, shown into his face in the form of a bitmap, a series of white and black pixels, where white represents 0 and black represents 1. They put the bitmap onto scrolls and gave the scrolls to avatars who went around the metaverse looking for victims. The Clint who tried to infect Hiro in the Black Sun got away, but he left his scroll behind. He didn't reckon on having his arms lopped off, and Hiro dumped it into the tunnel system below the floor, the place where the graveyard daemons live. Later, Hiro had a daemon take the scroll back to his workshop, and anything that is in Hiro's house is, by definition, stored inside his own computer. He doesn't have to jack into the global network in order to access it. It's not easy working with a piece of data that can kill you, but that's okay. In reality, people work with dangerous substances all the time, radioactive isotopes and toxic chemicals. You just have to have the right tools. Remote manipulator arms, gloves, goggles, leaded glass. And in Flatland, when you need a tool, you just sit down and write it. So Hiro starts by writing a few simple programs that enable him to manipulate the contents of the scroll without ever seeing it. The scroll, like any other visible thing in the metaverse, is a piece of software. It contains some code that describes what it looks like, so that your computer will know how to draw it, and some routines that govern the way it rolls and unrolls. And it contains, somewhere inside of itself, a resource, a hunk of data, the digital version of the snow crash virus. Once the virus has been extracted and isolated, it is easy enough for Hiro to write a new program called SnowScan. SnowScan is a piece of medicine. That is, it is a code that protects Hiro's system, both his hardware and, as Lagos would put it, his bioware, from the digital snow crash virus. Once Hiro has installed it in his system, it will constantly scan the information coming from outside, looking for data that matches the contents of the scroll. If it notices such information, it will block it. There's other work to do in Flatland. Hiro's good with avatars, so he writes himself an invisible avatar, just because, in the new and more dangerous metaverse, it might come in handy. This is easy to do poorly and surprisingly tricky to do well. Almost anyone can write an avatar that doesn't look like anything, but it will lead to a lot of problems when it is used. Some metaverse real estate, including the Black Sun, wants to know how big your avatar is so that it can figure out whether you are colliding with another avatar or some obstacle. If you give it an answer of 0, you make your avatar infinitely small, you will either crash that piece of real estate or else make it think that something is very wrong. You will be invisible, but everywhere you go in the metaverse, you will leave a swath of destruction and confusion a mile wide. In other places, invisible avatars are illegal. If your avatar is transparent and reflects no light whatsoever, the easiest kind to write, it will be recognized instantly as an illegal avatar and alarms will go off. It has to be written in such a way that other people can't see it, but the real estate software doesn't realize that it's invisible. There are about 100 little tricks like this that Hiro wouldn't know about if he hadn't been programming avatars for people like Vitaly Chernobyl for the last couple of years. To write a really good invisible avatar from scratch would take a long time, but he puts one together in several hours by recycling bits and pieces of old projects left behind in his computer, which is how hackers usually do it. While he's doing that, he comes across a rather old folder with some transportation software in it. This is left over from the very old days of the metaverse, before the monorail existed, when the only way to get around was to walk or write a piece of ware that simulated a vehicle. In the early days, when the metaverse was a featureless black ball, this was a trivial job. Later on, when the street went up and people started building real estate, it became more complicated. On the street, you can pass through other people's avatars, but you can't pass through walls. You can't enter private property. And you can't pass through other vehicles or through permanent street fixtures such as the ports and the stanchions that support the monorail line. If you try to collide with any of these things, you don't die or get kicked out of the metaverse. You just come to a complete stop, like a cartoon character running spang into a concrete wall. In other words, once the metaverse began to fill up with obstacles that you could run into, the job of traveling across it at high speed suddenly became more interesting. Maneuverability became an issue. Size became an issue. Hiro and VIII and the rest of them began to switch away from the enormous, bizarre vehicles they had favored at first. Victorian houses on tank treads, rolling ocean liners, mile-wide crystalline spheres, flaming chariots drawn by dragons, in favor of small, maneuverable vehicles. Motorcycles, basically. A metaverse vehicle can be as fast and nimble as a quark. There's no physics to worry about, no constraints on acceleration, no air resistance. Tires never squeal and brakes never lock up. The one thing that can't be helped is the reaction time of the user. So, when they were racing their latest motorcycle software, holding wild rallies through downtown at Mach 1, they didn't worry about engine capacity. They worried about the user interface, the controls that enabled the rider to transfer his reactions into the machine, to steer, accelerate, or brake as quickly as he could think. Because when you're in a pack of bike racers going through a crowded area at that speed, and you run into something and suddenly slow down to a speed of exactly 0, you can forget about catching up. One mistake, and you've lost. Hiro had a pretty good motorcycle. He probably could have had the best one on the street, simply because his reflexes are unearthly. But he was more preoccupied with sword fighting than motorcycle riding. He opens up the most recent version of his motorcycle software, gets familiar with the controls again. He ascends from Flatland into the three-dimensional metaverse and practices riding his bike around his yard for a while. Beyond the boundaries of his yard is nothing but a blackness, because he's not jacked into the net. It is a lost, desolate sensation, kind of like floating on a life raft in the Pacific Ocean. And that is going to have to do it for me for today. Things are really moving along. Next time, I think we will learn what the fancy black suitcase is. Um, we are going to get some serious plot dumped on us as well. Um, and, well, even more plot. And action stuff is going to ramp up to the point of absolutely ridiculous. It is going to go completely bonkers very soon. So look forward to that. Um, I know I am. I, this is only my, I don't know how many times I've read this book now. It's a couple. Um, a lot of fun. Hope people are enjoying it. I do this every week at the same time, Saturdays, Storytime Saturdays, haha, at noon Eastern Standard Time. And ooh, crunchy parts. And I also have other streams throughout the week. I've got a Mecha Mondays stream where I do something giant robot or mecha related or adjacent. And I have a Warframe Wednesdays stream where I do Warframe stuff. Uh, all of them at about the same time, noon Eastern Standard. And yeah, feel free to tune into those. I do have these all uploaded on my YouTube channel. I should really have that as a tagline when I'm broadcasting to indicate that you can find that there and the various places I stream to, which are multifarious. All right, have a great day and hope you enjoyed. Thanks for tuning in. Or if you didn't tune in, thanks for watching, listening, whatever. Have a good one, folks. Thanks again. Bye.